Reading the Times for Monday, January 6th. Reading the Times for Monday, January 6th, 2020. Iran ends nuclear limits as killing of Iranian general upends Middle East. Iran is clearly messaging that they hold cards here, but as this continues to go on, what will Iran continue to do? Well, you know, Brianna, I think it's important that we understand what's motivating Iran right now. Look, since the United States pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal and the administration imposed new sanctions on Iran, those sanctions have absolutely crippled Iran's economy. Helene, the ripple effects of all this are very complicated. I wonder if there's a simple way of thinking about this, which is that after all these months of provocation and response between the US and Iran, that President Trump felt it was time for the US to remind Iran that, at the end of the day, we are the military superpower, and our advantages over them are extraordinary and represent the kind of deterrent that means whatever Iran's ultimate response to this is, it will not be at all that severe, that, in a sense, we just called Iran's bluff. Iran uncertainty grips Congress as impeachment looms. President Trump's abrupt decision to kill Iran's top security commander has reshuffled the already fraught political dynamic around impeachment and thrust matters of war and peace into the middle of an election year debate over whether to remove Mr. Trump from office. While Democrats are trying to remove President Trump from office, the president is focused on removing terrorists from the face of the earth. Democratic leaders insisted the two issues must not be interwoven and said that lawmakers were obligated to follow through with the impeachment process even as they debated the way forward on Iran. Ms. Pelosi has refused to transmit the charges against Mr. Trump to the Senate in a bid to give Senate Democrats more leverage as they try to force Republicans to agree to call administration witnesses and gain access to more documents. It's not just software, new safety risks under scrutiny on Boeing's 737 MAX. The company informed the FAA about the potential vulnerability last month, and Boeing's new chief executive discussed possible changes to the wiring on an internal conference call last week, according to one of the people and the Boeing engineer, who spoke on a condition of anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. The senior Boeing engineer said that finding such problems and fixing them was not unusual and not particular to the MAX or to Boeing. Boeing has developed a fix for the software, but it has not yet been approved, and the process of returning the plane to service has taken much longer than Boeing anticipated. For Trump, the burden may be proving this is not the moment his critics predicted. An unstable president in way over his head, panicking with all his experienced advisors having quit and only the sycophantic amateurs remaining, assassinating foreign leaders, announcing plans to bomb civilians, a nightmare. Mr. Trump's advisors and allies dismissed the criticism as predictable partisan blowback from the political adversaries, too timid to take strong action against foreign enemies who have targeted Americans for years with impunity. Some of Mr. Trump's senior lieutenants were betting that any Iranian response proves less than meets the eye. Some experts on the region suggested that Mr. Trump's very unpredictability was a deterrent in itself, arguing that the killing of General Soleimani may have been so brazen and shocking to Iranian leaders that they will be wary of provoking an American president, evidently willing to escalate in ways his predecessors were not. Iran challenges Trump, announcing end of nuclear restrictions. Iran rips the mask off the idea it ever fully complied with a nuclear deal, or that it made a strategic decision to forswear nuclear weapons. Now it's on to the real job, effectively preventing the Ayatollahs from getting such a capability. But to much of the world, especially the Europeans, Russians, and Chinese, who are partners in the nuclear deal, Mr. Trump's decision to back out of the accord led to the crisis. The nuclear deal also laid out unusually stringent scrutiny for all of Iran's main nuclear facilities, including daily access of international atomic inspectors including daily access if international atomic inspectors requested it. If the high level of transparency that the nuclear deal provided should come to an end, Mr. Albright added, it could undermine confidence in the West's assessments of Iran's nuclear acts and intentions. All bets are off as Harvey Weinstein's sexual assault trial opens today. In another, she wrote, I love you, always do, but I hate feeling like a booty call, smiley face. He also produced a text message that Miss Haley Yee sent months after her alleged attack. Hi, just wondering if you have any news on whether Harvey will have time to see me before he leaves. Ex Miriam. Many of Mr. Weinstein's accusers have said they maintained contact with him after being preyed on by him because of his power as a producer. Mr. Weinstein's lawyer said of the messages from the women in the criminal case, these are women who spent time with him over periods of time, and I think we have evidence to show that the time was nothing but positive and favorable. In a CBS interview, Ms. Rotuno said the hashtag #MeToo movement allows the court of public opinion to take over the narrative and puts you in a position where you're stripped of your rights. In recent months, the prosecution won a major victory, the ability to call 3 additional women who said Mr. Weinstein had abused them. In an email to the Times reporter, Mr. Weinstein said he had been studying every aspect of the case. He broke with Mr. Braffman because of different approaches to how to deal with the trial, he said, adding, I felt it was important to have women on the team. Mr. Weinstein had sometimes irritated Justice James M. Burke, who will hear his case and shape many of the critical decisions of the trial, such as whether the defense will be able to air the questions of police misconduct. Venezuela's Maduro claims control of National Assembly, tightening grip on power. As Mr. Maduro's security forces surrounded the National Assembly building, his supporters blocked the re-election of the opposition leader, Juan Guaido, as the body's head. That deprived Mr. Guaido of the position that allowed him challenge to Mr. Maduro's leadership. Mr. Kozak, acting Assistant Secretary for the Department of State's Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs, said Mr. Guaido remains Venezuela's interim president under its constitution. He said that Sunday's phony National Assembly session lacked a legal quorum. In recent weeks, the opposition and the United States government had accused Mr. Maduro of trying to block Mr. Guaido's re-election by bribing and harassing lawmakers. Manuel Christopher Figuera, Mr. Maduro's former head of intelligence and the highest-ranking official to defect last year, said in an interview said the 2 top officials who had pledged to support Mr. Maduro's ouster ultimately reneged, helping seal Mr. Guaido's fate. As fires rage, Australia sees its leader as missing in action. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has been widely castigated for taking a vacation to Hawaii last month and trying to keep it quiet, while Australia was in the early clutches of one of its most devastating fire seasons ever. Mr. Morrison has minimized the connection between climate change and Australia's extreme environmental conditions, even as the country just completed its hottest and driest year on record. As the fire conditions worsened over the weekend, Mr. Morrison defended his government's response and announced a military mobilization, one that he quickly promoted in a video on social media, drawing widespread criticism. Car plows into German tourist in Italy. killing 6 and injuring 11. A car plowed into a group of young German tourists as they crossed a road in northern Italy early on Sunday, killing 6 people and injuring 11 others, 4 seriously, Italian officials said. The driver, a 27-year-old man from the area, showed a blood alcohol level nearly 4 times Italy's legal limit, according to the prosecutor's office in Bolzano, a city in South Tyrol area of northern Italy. 2 others were taken to a hospital in Innsbruck, Austria, and 1 each to hospitals in Bolzano and Brunico, Italy. 3 Americans die in Shabab attack on Kenyan base. A United States service member and 2 American military contractors died on Sunday in an attack on a Kenyan military base that the Pentagon said was carried out by the Islamic extremist group in the Shabab. American military officials said they assessed that the attack in Kenyan was not related to soaring tensions between the United States and Iran after an American drone strike last week that killed Major General Qasem Soleimani, one of Iran's top generals. The African Command's statement said that 6 contractor-operated civilian aircraft were damaged, but the Associated Press, citing an internal Kenyan police report, said the damage was much more extensive, including 2 American helicopters and multiple American vehicles at the airstrip. Erdogan announces first Turkish troops are headed to Libya. Turkey has started deploying troops to Libya, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Sunday evening in a live television interview, keeping his promise to support the fragile government in Tripoli, even as Western states had warned against escalating a conflict between the government and rebel forces. Turkish troops will be part of a combined training and fighting force to support the United Nations-backed government of national accord led by Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj in Tripoli, which has been under attack for months by forces from eastern Libya. Mr. Erdogan said the aim of the deployment, which he said would last for 1 year, was to help the Libyan government forces gain the upper hand. U.S. allies in Mideast fear they may pay price for Soleimani killing. The United States maintains close ties with Israel, as well as a range of Arab states, including Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The situation is particularly delicate for countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates that sit directly across the Persian Gulf from Iran and have close ties to the United States. The United States gave up on the effort to remove Mr. al-Assad from power years ago, and Syrian Kurds, an American ally in the battle against the Islamic State, have no idea how long the United States will stick around. U.S.-led coalition halts ISIS fight as it steals for Iranian attacks. The American-led coalition in Iraq and Syria halted its years-long campaign against the Islamic State on Sunday as United States forces braced for retaliation from Iran over a strike that killed a powerful Iranian commander, military officials said. Worsening the situation, Iran-backed militias that were also fighting the Islamic State have turned their attention toward the United States. Brett H. McGurk, Mr. Trump's special envoy to the coalition fighting the Islamic State until a year ago, warned that the departure of American troops from Iraq on the heels of suspending counterterrorism missions could leave the country vulnerable to a resurgent terrorist wave, as happened after United States troops pulled out of Iraq in 2011. Defenders of history take aim at Trump's threat to strike Iran's cultural sites. In several interviews earlier Sunday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo avoided directly answering whether the United States would attack cultural sites in Iran. The United States was among the harshest critics of the Islamic State's destruction of antiquities in Mosul, Iraq, and Palmyra, Syria, as well as the Taliban's obliteration of the Bamiyan Buddhas in Afghanistan in 2001. In 2018, the Trump administration withdrew the United States from UNESCO, the cultural organization of the United Nations that is known to travelers for its list of World Heritage Sites. Trump threatens Iranian cultural sites and warns of sanctions on Iraq. President Trump on Sunday evening doubled down on his claim that he would target Iranian cultural sites if Iran retaliated for the targeted killings of one of its top generals, and threatened very big sanctions on Iraq if American troops are forced to leave the country. We have a very extraordinarily expensive air base that's there, Mr. Trump said of Iraq. Mr. Trump told reporters that he might discuss making some of the intelligence available to the skeptical public nearly 17 years after the war in Iraq began on the basis of intelligence. Mr. Trump said of Iraq, Mr. Trump told reporters that he might discuss making some of the intelligence available to a skeptical public nearly 17 years after the war in Iraq began on the basis of intelligence that proved not to be credible. Mourners throng Iran's streets for Soleimani's funeral marches. General Soleimani's body was returned to Iran early Sunday after tens of thousands of people joined processions for him in 4 Iraqi cities, and was received with military salutes at the airport in Avaz, a city in the southwest. Iranian state television estimated that the mourners in Avaz and Mashhad, where the general's body was flown later for another procession, numbered in the millions. After the procession through Avaz, the general's body was flown to Mashhad, a holy city in northeastern Iran that contains Shiites' third most important shrine. Pompeo warns Iran's leaders U.S. could attack them if they retaliate. On Sunday afternoon, Mr. Trump announced on Twitter that his Twitter posts themselves were notification to Congress that should Iran strike any U.S. person on target, the United States will quickly and fully strike back, and perhaps in a disproportionate manner. The comments by Mr. Trump and Mr. Pompeo, who had pushed for killing General Soleimani on potential American attacks on Iran, are certain to increase tensions with Congress, where Democrats and some Republicans say the Trump administration has no authorization to enter into war with Iran. The vote in Iraq to seek full U.S. withdrawal is just the beginning of the predictable consequences of Trump's reckless escalation with Iran, said Jeffrey Prescott, Senior Director for Iran, Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf states on President Barack Obama's National Security Council. We should expect to see Iran accelerate its nuclear program as well. The bottom line is this. Trump and Pompeo promised that pulling out of the Iran deal imposing maximum pressure would get us new negotiations, a better deal, further limits on Iran's nuclear program, and deter Iran's regional aggression, he added. To fight climate change, one city may ban heating homes with natural gas. In recent years, city leaders have converted the street lights to low-power LEDs, provided bikes for city employees, and made plans to halt the burning of sewage solids. Now Bellingham is looking to do something that no other city has yet attempted, adopt a ban on all residential heating by natural gas. The ambitious plan, set for the consideration by the City Council in the coming weeks, had already prompted vigorous debate over how much one small city should try to do to avert climate catastrophe, at a time when the federal government was putting less emphasis on halting the trajectory of rising temperatures. For a post-9/11 generation, war isn't new, but fears of another one are. Over high school lunch tables, teenagers spoke of World War III. When they got home, they tearfully asked their parents whether they would be drafted. In cafeterias across the country, young men speculate about being sent abroad, even though United States officials have said repeatedly they do not want a war with Iran, and that reinstating a military draft would require congressional approval. At one protest in Seattle, Lucas Illa, 19, said he was not too worried about being drafted, but was concerned about the impact a war would have on others, including service personnel who might come from disadvantaged backgrounds. U.S. stops dozens of Iranian Americans returning from Canada. Dozens of Iranians and Iranian Americans were held for hours at Washington state's border with Canada over the weekend as Department of Homeland Security ramped up security at border ports after Iran threatened to retaliate against the United States for the strike that killed its top military leader. More than 60 of the travelers, many returning from work trips or vacations, were trying to come home to the United States on Saturday when agents at the Peace Arch border crossing in Blaine, Washington, held them for additional questioning about their political views and allegiances, according to advocacy groups and accounts from travelers. The agency has, in recent years, rushed to aggressively question travelers at the border and airports after being surprised by major changes in national security policy, such as President Trump's ban on travelers from 7 Muslim-majority countries. A typical Trump vacation with a momentous result. Mr. Lauder, president of the World Jewish Congress, who recently started the new $25 million effort to fight anti-Semitism that employs a pollster working for Mr. Bloomberg, listened as Mr. Trump ticked off a litany of administration actions. In a statement, Mr. Lauder would say only that he had many candid, positive, and forward-looking conversations with Mr. Trump, who deserves a great deal of support from the Jewish community for his fantastic record on Israel and his proven support of the Jewish people here at home. Then it was time to get back to the White House work, and Mr. Trump huddled with advisors offering him a range of options on how to respond to the death of an American civilian contractor killed on December 27th in a rocket attack on an Iraqi military base. On New Year's Eve, Mr. Trump hosted his annual party at Mar-a-Lago, arriving in a tuxedo with the First Lady, Melania Trump, and playing MC to a crowd that included his personal lawyer, Rudolph W. Giuliani. Buttigieg's bet. After Iran strike, military experience matters even more. There's no combat veterans left in the race. I have tremendous respect for Pete's service as an analyst, but analysts don't make decisions. Mr. Buttigieg had often invoked his military service. His first Iowa television advertisement began with him saying, "As a veteran." During an exchange about gun violence in October Democratic debate, Mr. Buttigieg told former Representative Beto O'Rourke of Texas, "I don't need lessons from you on courage, political or personal." And in December, he responded to a debate barb from Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, who said that his devotion to the First Amendment was a talking point, by suggesting his time in the military was sufficient evidence of his devotion to the Constitution. If you're in the service, you're going to meet people from all walks of life. Jonathan Murray, a Marine veteran who led Veterans Outreach for Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign, said Mr. Buttigieg's military credentials gave him a special credibility with voters, but did not mean he would necessarily have the support of his fellow veterans. Hate negative political ads? This is a primary for you. Give people a fair deal and real economic power, Tom Steyer, the biggest advertiser in Iowa, said in his most recent ad. Put humanity first, intones Andrew Yang in his newest ad. In total, Democrats spent nearly $30 million on the airwaves in Iowa and New Hampshire in 2019, according to Advertising Analytics, an ad tracking firm. In the 2012 and 2016 Republican primaries, he said, negative ads appeared earlier because the common wisdom was that if poll leaders Gingrich or Trump scored an early victory, they could use that momentum to get on roll that couldn't be stopped. He added the 20 Democratic race looks different, with Biden, Sanders, Buttigieg, and Warren closely bunched, all thinking they have a chance to win or place in one of the first 4 states. The closest any ad came to a negative attack in 2020 race was aired by a super PAC backing Cory Booker, the candidate whose defining message is one of harmony and unity. Though the 2008 and 2016 Democratic presidential primaries were contentious, neither featured a particularly negative attack ad. While Mr. Sanders released an ad in 2016 criticizing banks that corrupt politics with speaking fees, he made no mention of Hillary Clinton. 5 dead and 60 injured in Pennsylvania Turnpike multi-vehicle crash, officials say. The bus owner said it had left from Canal Street in New York City, though the authorities said it had started its trip in Rockaway, New Jersey. 2 tractor trailers hit the bus, and another tractor trailer then crashed into the first 2, Trooper Stephen Limani said at a news conference on Sunday afternoon. The tour bus belonged to a company called Z&D Tour, Trooper Limani said. Ticket companies offer small waiting rooms and staff to bring passengers to nearby bus stops. Army officer says his mother's deportation is completely inhumane. On Thursday, after 31 years in the United States, a country where she had built a life and raised 3 children, including a son now in the United States Army, Ms. Gomez was deported to Tijuana, Mexico, where she had little family left. In the months leading up to her deportation, Ms. Gomez, who, according to her family, ran a small business selling health and natural products and drove for Uber, had attempted to stay in the United States legally, including deferred action under the discretionary option for military families through Citizen and Immigration Services, Ms. Cabrera said. Carla McKissick, one of Ms. Gomez's daughters, expressed concerns about her mother's future in Mexico. Congress stopped President Trump's rush to war with Iran. Otherwise, why would the State Department have needed to advise all Americans to leave Iran? Since the storming of the American embassy in Tehran in 1979, the 2 countries have been in a low-grade or proxy conflict. General Soleimani spent 22 years at the helm of Iran's own Quds force as Tehran's liaison to countless militias, factions, and terrorist groups across the Middle East, except for brief moments of calm, such as when General Soleimani offered to help American troops attack his enemy, the Taliban, in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, only to rebuff cooperation after President George W. Bush lumped his nation in with Iraq and North Korea as part of an axis of evil. Lawmakers had expected a public document that would clearly explain to them and to the American public the reasons for the attack, but received a classified one instead. The highly unusual decision to classify this document in its entirety compounds our many concerns and suggests that Congress and the American people are being left in the dark about our national security, said Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Crisis as political catalyst. Last week, Donald Trump demonstrated the incredible power the president has to create such a crisis with the assassination of Iranian Major General Qasem Soleimani in Iraq. While John McCain suspended his campaign to fly back to Washington, a move that read as more showy dramatics than prudent stewardship, Obama refused to do so, saying, "I think it is going to be part of the president's job to be able to deal with more than one thing at once." Voters and the media saw the difference in the way the 2 men responded to the crisis, and their fortunes shifted. The Pew Research Center has reported the Pew Research Center data analyzing the tone and focus of media coverage through the final stretch of that election showed how the coverage shifted dramatically in mid-September 2008 to focus on the financial crisis, and the media narrative grew increasingly critical of Republican candidate John McCain. A solid, well-rounded candidate should be capable of responding to any crisis. A Democrat who can beat Trump. So where are you supposed to find a comfortably electable, qualified candidate who won't turn 80 while in office? Senator Amy Klobuchar has become an answer to that question in the final month before voting begins. Of course, Klobuchar needs to win over millions of primary voters, not just hundreds of convention delegates, which is why she remains an underdog. I'm not saying that Democrats should necessarily vote for Klobuchar. The insanity of Trump's wine tariffs. The United States imports over $4.25 billion a year in European wine, which is handled by thousands of importers, distributors, wine stores, and restaurants. In October, a peak season for wine sales, the government imposed a 25% tariff on French, Spanish, and German wines, along with single malt Scotch and other European food products. Worse, the new tariff covers more products, including sparkling wine and wine over 14% alcohol content, categories that had been spared before. The dire consequences of Trump's Soleimani decision. Despite President Trump's oft-professed desire to avoid war with Iran and withdraw from military entanglements in the Middle East, his decision to order the killing of Major General Qasem Soleimani, Iran's second most important official, as well as Iraqi leaders of an Iranian-backed militia, now locks our two countries in a dangerous escalatory cycle that will likely lead to wider warfare. How did we get here? What are the consequences of these targeted killings? Can we avoid a worst-case scenario? The escalatory cycle began in May 2018, when President Trump recklessly ignored the advice of his national security team and the opposition of our allies in unilaterally withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, despite Iran's full adherence to its terms and its efficacy in rolling back Iran's nuclear program. There is no hope now to revive, much less strengthen, the Iran nuclear deal, and we must expect Iran will escalate its efforts to revive its nuclear program without constraint. On prison reform from the inside. We even held a mayoral debate inside the facility, moderated by just young people. Each crack in the previously impenetrable juvenile prison gates helped normalize the young people's experience and humanize them. The recidivism rate of people who participate in programs like ours is far lower than the general prison population. When the king of debt is the president. Until we get over that, until most of us can accept that other countries may have better health care at lower cost and that our citizens could be better educated, we cannot move. We need to make an effort in the United States to become more content with disagreement and to embrace compromise, something that until relatively recently anchored and enriched American culture. Heed the advice of a famous figure in American literature, Atticus Finch. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. Solidarity March against anti-Semitism. Thousands rally after attack. The violence has shaken the Jewish community in the New York area and underscored the startling rise of these types of hate crimes across the country. Anti-Semitic hate crimes in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, the nation's three largest cities, are poised to hit an 18-year peak, according to an upcoming report from the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University, San Bernardino. We're not afraid to stand together, to be able to stand against violence and promote nonviolence, said Leslie Mayers, 44, who attended Sunday's rally, which was organized by the United Jewish Appeal Federation of New York and the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, along with dozens of other advocacy and Jewish community groups. After the stabbing in Monsey, New York, an enclave 30 miles northwest of New York City that is home to a large ultra-Orthodox community, the city announced that more police patrols would be assigned to some Jewish neighborhoods in the city. Taekwondo gave two children an outlet. It gave their mother a break. Miss Ramirez first reached out to the Catholic Charities about a year and a half ago, when she signed Edwin up for Bigs and Littles NYC mentoring. Edwin's temper can get the better of him at times, Ms. Ramirez said. Ms. Ramirez said she had already started to see the effects the lessons are having on her children. Japan defends its justice system after Carlos Ghosn's flight. Mr. Saito said Mr. Ghosn, who faces criminal charges of financial wrongdoing, would have received a fair and open trial, responding to Mr. Ghosn's intense criticism of the country's justice system. Mr. Ghosn's dramatic escape from Japan has put the country's legal system itself on trial, at least in the realm of public opinion. Takashi Takano, a member of Mr. Ghosn's legal team, wrote online that he had repeatedly explained to Mr. Ghosn that it would be difficult for him to get a fair trial, but there was still a strong possibility the court would find him not guilty. NAACP tells local chapters, don't let energy industry manipulate you. Florida Power and Light's annual donations doubled in 2014, just as the utility was pressing state regulators to restrict rooftop solar power and weaken the state's energy efficiency goals. The NAACP's Florida Conference issued a $50,000 invoice to the utility on September 11, 2014, a couple of months after Ms. Nwizi wrote an essay in the Tallahassee Democrat opposing a solar energy rebate program and in support of a utility-backed change to state efficiency goals. Ms. Nwizi said her staff wrote the article and similar ones, often copying verbatim from texts sent by Florida Power and Light and other utilities. Pay is rising fastest for low earners. One reason? Minimum wages. To get a sense of this impact, I have used data in the current population survey to look at minimum wage workers as a group and calculate the pressure their wage gains have put on aggregate wage growth over time, controlling for compositional changes in the share of minimum wage work. Wage pressure from minimum wage workers is magnified when you look at only the lowest wages. For the bottom third, state and local minimum wage increases have probably been the difference between a wage growth just before the economic crisis and the wage growth that is now above that pace. Your digital detox may be toxic for advertising. As digital culture moves out of its honeymoon phase, a backlash industry has sprung up, with coaches to help people break up with their devices, digital detox camps, and tech diets. Less time spent with mobile devices means fewer chances to reach consumers on these devices, increasing the cost of mobile advertising in the near term and forcing marketers to rethink where and how they spend advertising dollars in the long term. Ms. Cassard wrote in the new study, some of the brands with the most pointedly anti-tech ads are the tech companies themselves, which use messages about the isolation and distraction ushered in by tech devices to promote more tech devices. The Week in Tech, our hidden gems of 2019. Sometimes news breaks that is more exciting or terrifying or compelling for whatever reason than our beautiful articles about tech. California's new law to regulate freelance work is upsetting a lot of freelancers, as I reported with my colleague Noam Schieber, who followed with news that Uber and Postmates filed a lawsuit to stop it. Davey Alba, the tech team's new reporter on disinformation, wrote about how Facebook's chief executive, Mark Zuckerberg, told Congress that the company would share a huge amount of data related to disinformation. The digital faux pas we're all making. One for me is around email. I only recently came to the realization that actually responding to an email immediately is not necessarily the best etiquette, especially if it's a group email. Baby steps. Yes, there's so much stress around email. I am awful at email. Simply put, the best email etiquette means making your email as easy to deal with as possible. 6 tips to getting things done in 2020. Instead of rigorously scheduling every minute of your day around tasks and to-do lists, approach work more from the perspective of what are the things I care most about. What are the things I care about? And what are the things I want to devote my attention to? It seems like small arbitrary word swap, but when you're truthful with yourself about the things that take up your attention and whether those things are things you're truly content with giving your attention to, you might realize that solely thinking about work in terms of time spent isn't the best approach. Attention management is the art of focusing on getting things done for the right reasons, in the right places, at the right moments. A 2017 survey from the American Psychological Association found that being constantly and permanently reachable on an electronic device, checking work emails on your day off, continuously cycling through social media feeds, responding to text messages at all hours, is associated with higher stress levels. This has been Reading the Times for Monday, January 6, 2020. Reading the Times for Monday, January 6, 2020.